too, me too.
You look great.
Yeah.
You look like you haven't aged at all.
I know.
So anyway, it's great to see you. And
Thanks for talking with us today. This is awesome.
oh, it's my real pleasure. My real pleasure.
Are you still doing Abraham's? Is it Abraham's Path or?
Yeah, that's still going on. A lot of other things I'm working on. Yeah, I've been working on North Korea a lot actually over the last couple of years, and
that's right. I remember that.
Oh, wow.
And Venezuela, the Middle East. I just got off a call with the foreign minister of Pakistan about India, Pakistan. So COVID. So anyway, it's never a dull moment.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Accelerated or magnified every problem, right?
You're speaking
awesome.
with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and we were sending instructions to get a beatboxing class next week for the kids part of the program.
Yeah. Anyway, that's great. So tell me. So this online academy seems like it's really taken off.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because so maybe before everyone gets on, what happened was March 16th was the first day really that New York went shelter at home. They started the Friday before, but Monday really kind of happened. And so there's only 4 of us in the office and everyone else has worked from home. And we were looking at the fact that everyone's paralyzed. There's a need, our kids included, of needing like exercise, health, kids programs. And so we took what we build for the adult side in our culture and said we also have a summer camp and a kids program we build during the school year for children of our employees. So we have all the assets in place and said, rather than just use it for our family, let's open it up to friends, family, and just kind of neighbors. And it went from 100 people that first academy. So this is the 8th one. Every week on Thursday, it's at 50,000 people now. It's like, it's just growing like crazy.
50,000 people?
It's 50,000.
And it's fun. The audiences are people from Fortune 1000 companies, small companies, nonprofits, education sector.
Every group of military.
Cleveland Indians, sports teams on. So you're getting like a really eclectic group of
like
people.
a global audience. Yeah. And it's running right now from 3 a.m. to 10 p.m. So there's only 5 hours in the day it's not running. It's almost a 24-hour, like alternating every hour adult programs and kids programs. So there's like every exercise class you can imagine, every kid academics to like enrichment programs, like how to be a YouTuber, how to do cooking.
They're learning how to do coding, like coding classes, entry coding classes, chess, like learn how to play chess, Spanish classes.
Wow, how great.
Yeah.
And then what we did was we did this where like all the gig workers who suddenly had their incomes kind of go to zero. So we basically use this to pay all the gig workers. And so all the gig workers that we've hired on both the kids and adult side get paid. And then we have speakers like you coming on as well. And it sort of like kind of helps everybody we know, including all our clients and all their clients' children, and just kind of built a community. And so it's a little stressful because it's every Thursday. It happens to come faster and faster, but this is the 8th one in a row.
Wow. That's amazing. Really amazing.
Right. Angela, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think it's 1. So I see the group is growing. I know
it's showtime. The group is growing. We were at 1,500 and it's growing every second. So welcome everyone. My name is Angela Cavallaro. I'm going to be your moderator today. I have a big moderating team backing me up with Raul and other people that you see here. So we're really excited to have you guys. Let me just share my screen really quickly. I think actually you should already see, let me make sure it's sharing the right thing. All right, great. So a couple quick things I just wanted to run through before I turn it over to our really exciting speaker, William Ury, today. First and foremost, your mics will be muted and your video will be off just because we have so many people on this call just for ease. You will probably want to use the chat feature. So just make sure to find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're going to use that. And then one quick thing I did want to run through is our feedback app. So if some of you are new to our sessions, first off, welcome. Second off, we take feedback very seriously. We want to constantly improve on these sessions. And so we have a feedback app that we use where you can leave myself as the moderator feedback or William Ury as the presenter feedback. to make these classes better, more engaging, more fun. And so I just want to take about 1 minute right now. If everyone could, if you don't already have this app, use these QR codes, these links to download the feedback app. We will use it at the end of the class. So I'll bring this back up at the end, but let's just take a quick minute here right now. All right, thanks guys. I also saw a couple people had questions about what login to use. So if you use Perks at work, use that login. A couple people may use Corporate Perks or Wow Perks. You can use that login as well. So it should be the email that you use to sign up for this class and your password. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to our COA help desk. So the link is right here. We'll give people one or a few more seconds and then we'll kind of move on. We'll circle back to this at the end. All right. Okay. Quick things. I don't want to repeat myself too much. If you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to share them. We actually have a team behind the scenes who's kind of collating all of the questions, and then we will be sharing them at the end. We're going to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. So please use that chat feature. And another common question is, will this be available at the end? Can I rewatch this session? Can I get this video? The answer is yes. You also can share this with friends and family who maybe were not able to attend this session. It will all be on the COA website where you signed up for this. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and actually hand it over to Charlie and Megan, who are our co-CEOs here at NextJump, the company that puts on COA, to introduce our presenter today.
Hello, everyone. So this is Charlie speaking, and I'm one of the co-CEOs of NextJump. And just want to introduce Bill Ury really quick, because I met Bill, I think it was 2012. So it's almost 9 years ago. And when I first met him, I was told that he wrote basically the Bible of negotiations, the book Getting to Yes, which I think has sold close probably to the copies of the Bible being sold. But I mean, it's a book that's used in every school to teach people how to negotiate. So my instant thought was, this guy's going to be like Samuel L. Jackson from The Negotiator. And like, I'm expecting just loud talking, aggressive, and you'll hear Bill, he's the total opposite. And one of the things Megan and I have had the privilege over the years is we have half of our business is running leadership academies for the who's who of leaders around the world. And we've met, I mean, the craziest, coolest people at every area. And I was explaining to a bunch of people, I put Bill at the top of that list, at the very top, where not only is he doing like the craziest work with prime ministers and presidents and drug cartel heads helping create negotiations, the practical advice he has that's relevant to everyone is just unfathomed, where most people usually fall in theory or they're so in the weeds, they don't really have time to speak. He's able to do both. And so as we built this community academy, reached out to the people we knew to get their time, what I love is for a guy who does that much, he was one of the first to respond and give his time. So without further ado, Bill, thank you for taking the time, and excited to have you speak today.
It's a huge pleasure, Charlie, and hi, Megan. And as Charlie said, my passion is helping people get to yes, whether it's in any situation, at home, at work, and in the larger world, where we have so many problems today to solve. And for me, yes means not just a win for yourself. You want to obviously meet your needs, your interests, and get what you want. But it's also obviously a win for the other side. It's a win-win. And it goes beyond that. To me, what we need in this world today, particularly in this world of COVID, it reminds us, is we need a win-win-win. 3 wins. A win for yourself, a win for the other side, and a win for the whole. Whether that whole is your family, the whole team, the whole work organization, the society, the community, or the world. That's what we really need, is those 3 wins. And it's not easy. Negotiation is not easy. There's a lot of emotions. People are really stuck in their positions. People are struggling over what they think of are scarce resources. There's an asymmetry of power. So how do you get to yes in the challenging situations that we face every day in our families now, as we're all, sheltered at home, a lot of us have been, or in our communities, in our work situations. How do we get to yes in those tough situations and still preserve those valuable relationships that mean so much to us? So, so what I'd like to do is just ask you a couple questions about your experience as negotiators. And in fact, I'll even invite you to join the chat group too, and which is that bottom on the button on the bottom there. If you want, just think for a moment about who you negotiate with in the course of your day. Who are all the people you negotiate with? You might even put it down in the chat. It's your kids, it's your colleagues, it's your clients, it's your bosses. Yeah, everyone I can see right now, suppliers, my ex, internal customers. So think about all those people for a moment. And now ask yourself, how much of your time do you think you spend engaged in the act of negotiation, broadly speaking? It's the act of back and forth communication, trying to reach agreement on some issue, however small, however big. What percentage of your time do you think it is? 60%, I'm seeing here, 24/7. So you get a sense that, we may not always think of it as negotiation, but we're actually negotiating in one sense from the time we get up in the morning to the time we go to bed at night. So question is, how can we do it better? You're all very experienced, but how can we do it better, particularly in those tough situations that mean so much to us? Let me ask you one other question. If you had to think of the 10 most important decisions you had to make in the last year, how many of them could you just make by yourself, just unilaterally? And how many of them did you actually have to reach with someone else through some process of shared decision-making, what you might call negotiation? How many of the 10 most important decisions did you have to make? Of the 10 most important decisions, how many did you have to negotiate last year? Think about that. And I think you'll start to appreciate how central, how important this art is. And it's something that we can all improve. No matter how good you are, you may be the best champion athlete. You always have a coach. So it's just useful to take a moment right now and see how we can improve our skills. And as you think about it, these next 40 minutes or so, what I'd like you to do is have in mind at least one negotiation that you're currently facing that might be giving you some problems. It might be at home, it might be with a spouse or a partner, or it might be at work with a client or a colleague or a supplier. It might be in the larger community. Just have at least one situation in mind, because I'm going to kind of run through a little bit of a framework. And what I want you to do as I run through that is apply it to your particular situation. And my hope is that you'll, by the end of these next moments, you'll have maybe a fresh idea, a fresh approach about how to approach that situation, a new idea or two that might help you get to yes. That's my goal here. So what I'd like you to do is, for a moment, I'm going to just share a few slides here and just start about how do we approach the tough situations that we face every day here. Let me see if I can bring up my PowerPoint and share that. And let's see if we can go there. Okay, so different approaches for negotiation. If you think about it, there are at least 4 different approaches that we can take to getting to yes, depending on how much concern we're showing for our interests and how much concern we're showing for the other side's interests. And so you could, for example, have a lot of concern for your own interests, no concern for the other side's interests, and you get this kind of more these hard adversarial approaches, winner takes all, I get everything. Or we could have, the opposite of that, which is a lot of concern for the other side's interests. After all, it's a family member, it's a key client, and you'll get a kind of a rather soft, accommodating approach. One thing that's really common, I find, particularly inside families or inside organizations, is because no one really wants to talk about a difficult issue and whatever, we end up avoiding. And when we avoid the issue altogether, we're not really advancing our interests and we're not advancing the other side's interests. So my question is, how do we do both? How do we get to that top right-hand corner where we're looking for mutual gains? We're looking for that win-win-win. How do we do that in our difficult situations? Now, all of us are going to have different edges in this situation, learning edges. Some of us might take a little bit of a hard approach. Some of us take a soft approach. How do we take something that combines the best of both. So what I'd like to do is talk to you about six principles. Two of them have to do with the people, two of them have to do with the problem, and two of them have to do with the process. There's like the people, the problem, the process. Think about your own situation for a moment. There's the who, that's the people, the relational aspect, the psychological aspect. The problem, which is the substance, the issue. What's the issue that you're dealing with? Is it a sale? Is it trying to decide who takes care of the kids? And then the third is the process. How are you going to get there? There's the who, the what, and the how. So let's start with the who for a moment. The most important who in the negotiation right now is ourselves. And what I've found in the 40 years that I've been helping people negotiate and get to yes, is that the single biggest obstacle to us getting what we want in life and in negotiation is not the difficult person on the other side of the table. That often seems to be the problem. It's that difficult partner, it's that difficult family member, the difficult colleague, and so on. What I found is the biggest block to us getting what we want in a negotiation is right here. It's me, it's myself, it's ourselves. Human beings, we are reaction machines. And as the old saying goes, when angry, you will make the best speech you will ever regret. And that's what I find so often in negotiation is, even though negotiation, we're trying to go for a goal, we end up acting in ways that make it even more difficult for us to achieve our objectives. And so the foundation of successful negotiation, the first principle, is this metaphor I like to use of going to the balcony. Imagine that you're negotiating for a moment on a stage, and there's you and the other side and other players. Sometimes there are many players in the negotiation, lots of characters in the play. How do we, for a moment, go up to the balcony overlooking that stage? The balcony is a metaphor for a place of perspective, a place of calm, a place of self-control. It's a place where we can keep our eyes on the prize, on what's truly important to us. That, to me, is the foundation of successful negotiation. It's how do we shift from the reactive mind to the creative mind, to the mind that actually can envision new possibilities. If you notice, the word reactive and the word creative have the same letters. It's just the C goes in a different place, in creative. And that's what we're trying to do, is shift from reactive to creative at this moment. And that, to me, is key. So think for a moment about what are your favorite techniques for going to the balcony? What do you do? Some people like to, take a break. Some people like to breathe. What are your favorite ways to go to the balcony, to pause for a moment? I'll just give you a story from my own experience, just to illustrate this. About a number of years ago, I was called into the country of Venezuela, which was experiencing a big political civil conflict as it is today. And I was asked to meet with the president of the country, Hugo Chavez at the time, and meet with his opposition and see if there was some possibility to diffuse the crisis, to lower the temperature, because there were a lot of people worried that it might break out into a lot of violence in the streets, perhaps even a civil war. So I had a couple of meetings with President Chavez, and I remember one of them, he liked to meet at night. He asked to meet at 9 o'clock in his palace. And I went there with my colleague, Francisco. We were waiting at 9 o'clock, patiently, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Finally, at midnight, we're ushered in to see the president, expecting to find him all alone at that hour, but he had actually his entire cabinet arrayed behind him. And he kind of motioned me to a chair, and he said, Ury, he said, have a seat here. Tell me, what do you think of the situation? How's it going? And I thought I would put a kind of positive spin on it. And I said, Mr. President, I've been talking to some of your ministers here. I've been talking to the opposition. And I think there's a little bit of progress. Well, progress wasn't the word he wanted to hear. That was a mistake on my part. It triggered him. He said, what do you mean progress? Don't you see all those traitors on the other side? Don't you see what they're doing? All the dirty tricks they're up to? And he proceeded to get livid with fury, and he leaned in very close to my face and proceeded to shout at me for approximately 30 minutes. Now, I was there, you're being shouted at. I'd been working in Venezuela for about a year at that point, and I thought, all my work's gone down the drain, start to feel embarrassed, a little bit humiliated in front of the whole cabinet being dressed down like that.
And that's the emotions that you go through when you're in a difficult situation, whether it's with your spouse or with your client or whatever. Someone's yelling at you. What do you do in a situation like that? And I felt like reacting, of course. I felt like saying, well, I'm not, he said, you're naive, you third parties, you know nothing about the situation. I felt like defending myself. But then I remembered to go to the balcony. Actually, a friend of mine had said, as a little technique, he said, Bill, when you're in a tough situation, why don't you pinch the palm of your hand? And I said, Hernan, why would I do that? He said, because that'll give you a little momentary pain. It'll keep you alert. So for some reason, I remembered to pinch the palm of my hand, and I remembered, why am I here? That's the key question you ask yourself on the balcony. What am I trying to achieve? What's the prize? I'm trying to calm down the situation. Is it really going to advance my interests if I get into a shouting match with the president of Venezuela? So I said no. So I just bit my tongue and I listened to him. And I began to calm down. I kind of watched myself. It's almost like you watch yourself in a movie from the balcony. Just watch the play. And I watched him and I watched his body language, and I was wondering, why is he getting so upset? And, this is a guy who could go on give a speech for 7 hours, but after 30 minutes of no reaction, I was just listening to him and nodding my head. He finally began to run out of steam, and I watched his body language. His shoulders began to sink a little bit. And then in a weary tone of voice, he said, so Ury, what should I do? Now that is an opening. Before that, if I'd tried to give him any advice, when someone's in an angry state of mind, it's like banging your head against a stone wall. But then he had a little opening. And so I said, Mr. President, it's December. It's almost Christmas time. Last December, all the festivities were canceled because of the conflict. Why not just give everyone a break, call a truce, give everyone a chance to go to the balcony? And maybe in January, he'll come back in a better place, willing to listen. He said to me, well, that's an excellent idea. I think I'll announce that in my next speech. His mood had completely shifted, so much so that he said, and over Christmas, why don't you come around the country with me and see the country? And then he thought for a moment. He said, but you're a neutral, you're a mediator. Maybe it wouldn't be so good to be seen in my company all the time. He said, no problem, I'll give you a disguise. What I learned from that situation was that the single greatest power you have as a negotiator is the power not to react. It's the power to go to the balcony. It's the power to listen to the other side. And so that's the key. First key principle foundation is go to the balcony, which then brings you to the second one, which is to listen. It's funny, but we think of negotiating as a lot of talking. But actually, if you observe the behavior of successful negotiators, you find that they listen far more than they talk. Why? Because by listening, you can put yourself in the other side's shoes, understand where they are, and then begin to think about how you can influence them. If you don't have that, how can you possibly get them to yes? After all, negotiation is an exercise in influence. You're trying to change the other side's mind. How can we change the other side's mind if we don't know where their minds are? So listening turns out to be key. And that's what I was doing with President Chavez, is you're listening not to refute, not to get into an argument, but listening to understand. And what that means is listening from within their frame of reference. That's what's hard. We all listen, but do we really listen from within the other side's frame of reference? What is it like to be in his shoes? What's really going on for him? Why is he so angry? What does he really want here? Those are the kind of questions you want to be asking yourself as you listen. So, so much so that in negotiations, we appoint a spokesperson often if there's a team. I think it's just as important to appoint a listener so that we can really listen. And sometimes it's useful to paraphrase, actually to repeat back to the other side what you heard them say, because oftentimes we miss it. So listening to me is key. So in terms of the people, first thing is go to the balcony. And the second thing is really train our abilities, hone our abilities to listen. Not to listen the way we normally listen, but to listen deeply from within their frame of reference. That's what turns out to be the key. Listening also conveys respect, it builds relationship, it builds trust, it builds the atmosphere in which you can then deal with the problem. It allows you to be soft on the people as you are now about to be hard in trying to deal with the problem. So that's how you set up the negotiation for success. Now, let's talk about how can you be hard on the problem? What does that mean? Oftentimes, what people think being hard on the problem means is it means being hard on your position. And the key, perhaps the key distinction in problem-solving negotiation is this distinction between your position, which are the concrete stances that we take, the demands, it's the dollars and cents, it's the terms and conditions, and the interests, which are what lies behind those positions. It's the positions, the interests are the underlying motivations. What do people really need? What do they desire? What's their aspirations? What are they concerned about? What are their fears? And what's the secret in changing the game of negotiation is to change the focus, that spotlight, from the position over here to the interests over here. There's a story told many, many years ago by maybe the earliest management theorist in the United States, who was a woman whose name was Mary Parker Follett, who lived 100 years ago in Boston. She once told a story about two men quarreling in a Harvard library. One wanted the window open, the other one wanted it closed. They got into a big quarrel about it. And so one man would go and open the window, the other one would go and slam it shut, bothered everyone in the library. Finally, the librarian comes over and she asks the first one, why? And that's the key question in trying to get at interest. Why? Why do you want the window open? He says, well, I want some fresh air. Now she's on to his interests. Then she asks the second person, why do you want the window closed? He says, why? Because the draft is blowing my papers around. So they're focusing on the interests. She's got them from positions to interest by asking the simple question, why? Then she asks them, well, how can you get fresh air without you a draft? The two think about it for a moment, the students. And finally, one says, I've got an idea. And he goes over into the room next door, he opens a window there, thus providing fresh air for the first person without a draft for the second. Now, in that very simple interaction, what's happening is the librarian is helping them move the spotlight from positions, open window, closed window, to the underlying interests. If they were just going for a split the difference compromise, which is often what we do in negotiation, that'd be a half open window, but it would have been too much draft and not enough fresh air. By going behind positions to the underlying interests of fresh air and no draft, they're able to come up with a creative solution, a creative option that satisfies both students' interests. And that's what you're looking for in negotiation, constantly. You're constantly probing behind positions for what are the underlying interests. So go back to your own situation for a moment. Think about what your position is. Think about what the other side's position is. Think about what your interests are. Why do you really want that? Well, why do they really want that? And then see if you can come up with an option that is good for both sides. So go from positions to options by inventing. It's a process of inventing, the process of brainstorming, leveraging differences. Oftentimes differences actually help you create. There's like this famous story of the two sisters quarreling with each other about an orange. They each want the orange. So what do? They take an orange, they cut it in half. Well, one sister takes her half and eats the fruit. The other sister takes her half, throws away half the fruit, and uses the half of the peel for baking a cake. Now, if they'd actually paused for a moment and gone behind the position of wanting the orange for what the underlying interests were, which was one was interested in eating the fruit, one was interested in baking a cake, they could have ended up with a whole fruit for one and a whole peel for the other. And that's what we're looking for in negotiation, is those joint gains. That's the key in negotiation. Your single greatest opportunity is to take what seems to be a fixed pie and see if you can expand it. So that's the problem. Those are the keys to deal with the problem. Now, let's, for a moment, talk about the process in negotiation. The process in negotiation is how are you going to get your interests? How are you going to satisfy your interests? How are you going to satisfy the other side's interests? Well, the first thing you want to think about when you're thinking about satisfying your interests, paradoxically in a negotiation is not first to think about what's the agreement. It's to think about what we call in negotiation your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Now, what's that? Essentially, it's your best course of action if you cannot reach agreement. Let's imagine you can't reach agreement on a sale. If you're the seller, do you have an alternative buyer? If you're the buyer, do you have an alternative supplier? What's your BATNA? What are you going to do to satisfy your interests if for some reason you cannot reach agreement? Think about your own situation for a moment. Ask yourself that question. The reason why that's so important is that BATNA, if you have an alternative, it gives you confidence. Imagine you're looking for a job. Looking for a job. You've got one job interview. It's next week. You're going to be talking about salary. If it's your only opportunity, you're the only thing you've got, think about how that negotiation goes. You'll probably accept anything that they offer because you're just desperate to get a job. But imagine you take the intervening days to think through what's your BATNA. What are you going to do if you don't get that job? Is there another alternative? Could you move cities? What are you going to do? Are you going to go back to school, get more training? What is your best alternative for satisfying your interests? If you have that, let's imagine you get another job offer. Maybe it's not even that a great job offer, but it's at least something else. You're going to end up negotiating with more confidence. So BATNA equals power in negotiation. BATNA equals confidence. Let me just give you an example here. Some years ago, I was called in to help a man who later became a friend of mine, who was one of Brazil's biggest businessmen. He had gotten into a terrible conflict with his business partner about control over Latin America's largest retailer, 150,000 employees, titanic battles, who's in control here? He was the chairman of the board. The other guy had most of the stock. How's this going to work? And they were fighting each other in court, in the papers. It'd gotten really ugly for a number of years. And everyone thought, who's going to win? Who's going to lose? And I came in there. I didn't know if I could help. But the first question I asked him was, the question I asked before, which is, what do you really want? Help him go to the balcony. What are his interests in that situation? And ask him, well, what do you really want? Well, he said, he's a very intelligent guy. He said, okay, I want a certain amount of stock. He named a large number. I want the end of the non-compete clause, which was for 3 years. I want the company headquarters. He had about 6 things that he wanted. Those were his positions, right? I said, yeah, but what do you really want? You're very wealthy. You can do anything you want. He was over 75 at that moment. I said, what do you want to do with your life? What do you really want? And he looked at me and he said, Bill, I'll tell you what I really want. I want my freedom. And as soon as I heard the word freedom there, I knew that we'd gotten to, what was the core there? What was his real interest there? And I said, what does freedom mean to you? He says, well, freedom means time to spend with my family, which is so important to me, time to make new deals. That's what I want. I want my freedom. And for him, freedom had a particular resonance because he'd been kidnapped a number of years earlier, held in a coffin for a week. So for that guy, freedom really meant something. And I said, okay, well, maybe I can help you. I don't know if I can help you get your positions, but maybe I can help you get your freedom. And so one of the questions I asked him is, what's your BATNA? In other words, if you don't reach agreement with this guy, what are you going to do independent of reaching agreement with him? I said, is there anything you can do to spend time with your family right now? He said, sure, I can take a vacation. Is there anything you can do to start to make new deals? Yeah, I can move out and start up an office and make new deals. And it was interesting. That gave him the freedom and the confidence then for us then to think about how to negotiate with his business opponent, his former business partner. And that was the key. And so that brings me to the final step here, which is, how do you actually reach agreement in a very difficult situation like this one, where it had been going on for 3 years, no agreement whatsoever? The key is, on the basis of everything we've learned, how do you build the other side, what might be called a golden bridge? How do you, in other words, how do you make it as attractive as for them to say yes? So once I knew what my client wanted, which is he wanted freedom, and I could tell what was really important for him was dignity. You know, he didn't want to lose the other guy. I sat down with a friend of his business rival, of his business opponent in Paris, and he said, well, why are you here? He asked me when I sat down with him, I said, I'm here because life's too short. What do you mean life's too short? Life's too short for these mega conflicts where everyone fights each other, but you know, it's a win-lose contest, but in the end, everyone loses. I mean, your client's losing, my client's losing, their families are suffering, their employees are suffering, you know, the societies, because it was so big, the conflict are suffering. Who needs this? He said, so how would you approach it? I said, well, if we can only just agree, my client's interests are clear. He wants his freedom and he wants some dignity. I'm sure your client wants the exact same two things. He wants freedom to move on with his life. He wants dignity. He doesn't want to lose. You know, the whole papers are making this into who's going to win this one. He said, oh, that's interesting. Why don't you come back and see me tomorrow? So we got together for 45 minutes the next day. And on the back of an envelope, we sketched out what would freedom and dignity mean, you know, in terms of stock, in terms of non-compete, in terms of everything there. And we sketched out a potential deal. That was on a Tuesday. By Friday, we had both men in a law office signing an agreement, ending the conflict, shaking hands, joint press release, wishing each other well. I asked my client, how do you feel? He said, you know, Bill, I got everything I wanted. He said, but the most important thing is I got my life back. And I asked the fellow on the other side, he said, I'm happy too. We're very happy. That's the key in negotiation, is to go from win-lose to a win-win, and a win for their families, which was thrilled, a win for all the company employees. Both men, I went with both men and they made a speech to the company employees together and they wished each other well. That's the key in negotiation, is a shift from win-lose to win-win-win. And building them that golden bridge is key. I want to take a few questions, but before I do, I just want to leave you with one last technique that I find very useful in negotiation, which is when you start a negotiation, sit down and write out not only your victory speech, in other words, a speech you would give to the people you care about how you won the negotiation, but most importantly, write out the other side's victory speech. Write out their victory speech. What would they need to say to their key constituency in which they say, I got what we really needed? And then work backwards from that. Think about your job as helping them deliver that victory speech, reaching an agreement that's good for your interests, but also meets their interests too. I think it's one of the most useful devices, is see if you can write out their victory speech. See what you're proposing, see if the other side can sell it to their constituency. That's the acid test. So let me pause there. There were basically 6 principles here in your negotiations, which are first go to the balcony, then listen, focus on interest behind positions, invent options for mutual gain, know what your BATNA is, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, and finally build the other side, the golden bridge. So let me pause and see what questions you might have in the chat room. I don't know whether Charlie or Megan or Angela, how are we going to do the questions?
So David and I have been collecting the questions behind the scenes. So we have a couple teed up for you if you're ready to just kind of dive in. So thank you for that. That was wonderful. I think the first question that we have is, what if the other party is happy with the status quo and has no interest in its discussing or negotiating? How would you get them to open up to eventually, arrive at a win-win?
Well, I would go back to trying to really listen to them and find out, why are they happy with the status quo? What is it about the status quo? What's the core interest of theirs that's satisfied with the status quo? And then I would think about what's my if, for example, in a situation like that, then I'd think about how do I build them a golden bridge? How do I make it as attractive as possible to move to the non-status quo solution that I have in mind? How do I make it as attractive as possible for them to do that? And then I think through what's their BATNA, what are they going to do if we don't reach agreement? And I particularly think about what's my BATNA. In other words, because there are certain situations where they've got all the power, they want the status quo. You've got to think about what your BATNA is, because sometimes you have to change the power situation and persuade them that in fact, what they want is, or what you want, that golden bridge that you're building for them is actually superior for them than their BATNA, than the BATNA of what happens if you don't reach agreement. Does that mean you lose the potential deal? Does it mean you have to go to court? What's the alternative? You really need to always think of a negotiation in terms of how does it compare with the alternative, the BATNA.
Hey, Bill, can I throw a question at you? Just really quick, this is Charlie. Given the number of negotiations you've been involved in, I'm sure you've had many failed negotiations, right?
Absolutely.
And I assume for most of us, most of our failed negotiations happen with our own family or our own kids. Can you share with us some of the more spectacular failures, especially in those realms?
Oh, definitely. First of all, let me just ask everyone for a moment. If there are two kinds of negotiations that you face in life, they're the external negotiations, like with clients, with suppliers, with banks, government, whatever. And then there are the internal negotiations, like inside the company, or as Charlie is just saying, inside the family. Of those two types of negotiations, which personally do you find more challenging? The external negotiations or the internal ones? What would you say? And
internal, yes.
Internal, right? Internal. That's what's interesting is that, it's the internal negotiations, and nothing is more internal than the negotiation with our own family. Although the only thing that would be more is the negotiation within ourselves, that I would say sometimes is even more difficult than the one with our family. But to answer your question, Charlie, I have a daughter who's just turned 22, just graduating from college, and she thinks nothing of my skills as a negotiator, because in front of her, I'm kind of a walkover. She doesn't understand how I could be an expert, a so-called expert on negotiation, and whether it's it's been over the years, but whether it's over like when she was young, I still do. I read her to her at night. I say, okay, that's enough. That page, nope. How about it? One more page, one more paragraph. We all know as parents what our children do, but I tend to fold when it's a negotiation with my own daughter.
Thanks, guys. And I think a follow-up to that, we've seen a few questions along the lines of like, is there one specific thing that you think outside of like internal, external negotiation that can lead to a bad outcome? Like, what's the one fatal flaw is one that we've gotten a couple of questions on.
That leads to a bad outcome for both? I think it's a failure to listen. I would come back to that again. Is when the communications, it turns out we think when we're talking that the other side is hearing us, but in fact, oftentimes, particularly in conflict situations, I find that the communicating is a little bit like using smoke signals in a high wind. We keep missing each other. And another one I would say is this kind of mindset, which is so common, which is we're asking the question of, am I winning? Am I winning? Who's winning? For example, just going back to Charlie's question, for example, in a marriage, if you're asking your spouse, who's winning this marriage? Your marriage is a difficulty. It's not the right question to ask. It's the real question to ask in negotiation is, how can I satisfy my interests and at the same time you satisfy your interests And I would say, and how can the whole, the family, the organization benefit from this? I really think we need to widen our perspective to that third win. And that's so critical right now. And I mean, this crisis that we're in right now just highlights how important it is for us to always keep in mind that third win of the win for the whole society.
Great. And I think that kind of teed up this next question we have. That is, if you're running a team and you have employees on your team that listen to respond, so they're basically listening, kind of analyzing the whole time, creating a perfect response, how would you approach that or handle that versus the real listening that you've been talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How can you help others listen better? Well, the first obviously would be to model it yourself, right? And when they're talking, use reflective listening. Just before, when they make a remark, when they say something, see if you say, hold on for a moment, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. And see if you can repeat back to their satisfaction what they're saying. And then ask them to do the same thing for you, which is, after you've spoken, see if they can repeat it back. And then you're train them to see things from your perspective. But the first thing you need to do is see things from their perspective. I remember once being on a talk show once, and there was a mother who said, how do I deal with my 5-year-old? My 5-year-old never listens to me. And I asked somewhat gingerly, I said, well, do you listen to your 5-year-old? And turned out she wasn't listening to her 5-year-old. So it's very hard for us to expect others to really listen well to us unless we're listening well to them.
Yeah, I agree. So we are running a little bit over. I know we got started a few minutes late with my kickoff. So if you have time for one more question, I think there's a really relevant one. So how do you perceive negotiations changing over the next 12 to 18 months during COVID while everyone's trying to adjust here? And then the second part of that question is, what do negotiations look like when you can't be in the same room?
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that's changing, is that we're doing a lot of negotiation over Zoom. And you don't, it's great. Zoom is certainly better than the phone call, but it's not the same as, pressing the flesh and really, being, that's what we have always used for millions of years to kind of build connection, build trust. And so it's challenging. It's more challenging than ever before. The other thing I'll say is, and it's possible. It's really possible. I think we're incredibly creative, adaptive creatures, and it's amazing how many activities that people thought couldn't be done on Zoom that we're learning to do on Zoom. So never underestimate human creativity. The other thing I'll just say too, more generally, is I think, in facing this crisis, as bad as the crisis is, both medically and economically, socially, for us, for the entire planet really is, the bigger problem is how we respond to it. We have a choice of how we can respond to these crises. We can either respond by scarcity thinking, fear, got to save myself, the hell with everyone else, or we can respond with cooperation, looking for ways to satisfy our interests and the others and the whole. In other words, looking for those win-win-win solutions. And to me, our societies are going to be, our success is going to be determined by how well we cooperate in this crisis, both internally inside this country and inside our families, inside our work organizations. And so this is why this work of getting to yes is so critical right now, because there's no problem. Look, we've this, I just was thinking about my grandmother. My grandmother lived in the 20th century. She was born in 1902. When she was 12, World War I broke out. I don't know, 30, 40 million people died in World War I. When she was 16, the Spanish flu took 50 million people. When she was 38, the World War II, the Holocaust, we had the Cold War.
you know, humans can deal with, we can deal with these crises, we can get beyond them. And the key to me is going to be our ability to cooperate with each other in the face of difficulty, which is the art of getting to yes. So I want to wish all of us much success at all levels, family, work, society, and planet, in this art, fine art of getting to yes. Much success.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like that was such a great high note to end things on, just with everything going on. So Charlie and Megan, I don't know if you guys wanted to say anything quick.
This is Megan. Bill, thank you so much. I was just saying to Charlie that, you know, in our company, we use the victory speech. We use the Bhatna. I mean, this is like part of our everyday language. We learned so much from you years ago when we first met you. And it's like so good to hear it again, because I'm picking up nuances I just hadn't picked up before. And obviously that was really profound what you just said. I'm still, you know, our ability to deal with this crisis and how people have gone through so much. So just thank you so much. That was excellent. We really just loved that. That was awesome. Thank you.
Okay, the only comment I have is, like I said at the beginning, Samuel L. Jackson. Right? Teddy bear version.
Thanks, Charlie.
Okay.
Real pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you, Angela. Really, real pleasure. I wish everyone stay healthy, stay safe, and let's get to yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, as always.
All right, wonderful. So people are posting awesome thank yous in the chat. So thanks everyone for coming. If you have another few minutes, we would really love your feedback. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly and go through kind of what that looks like. Share screen 2. Okay. If it will work. Okay. So I'm going to just have the screen up for one more minute. So if you need to download the feedback app quickly, you can. But then I'm going to move on to the next slide to show you how to give feedback. So again, you'd be giving